Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Almond Conference. Glad you are able to join us today. My name is Julie Adams. I'm Vice President, Global Technical Regulatory Affairs for the Almond Board. We're really looking forward to this session today. This is a new area. We've really not focused on North Africa in the past. So we're looking forward to the chance to really talk a little bit about what's going on, not only from the standpoint of research and data, but also to hear some examples and experiences from industry members. And I have said you can be as honest as you like, so not to worry. So basically, the panel today, as you'll see, consists of Brad Rose with Rose Research. Brad and his team have been looking at North Africa for the Almond Board and will be presenting their findings to us in the coming months, I believe. They're still in the process of doing more research, and that's what Brad will be talking about. And then Sunny Tour from Valley Pride and Stuart McAllister from Terra Nova Trading will give us their experiences on what's been happening in the region. So let's dive in. Basically, the question is always, why North Africa? This is a region the board really has not been involved in up to now. It's a new area, but it really does show some incredible potential. So if you look at the region, and what we're looking at when we talk about North Africa is Morocco, Tunisia, Algeria, and Egypt. Those are the four markets that we've been focused on. But the reason is really you're looking at a younger and growing population which is interested in health and nutrition. So perfect opportunities for almonds. There's also greater urbanization underway. So in a number of these markets, while it may not be formal retail, you're seeing a lot more urbanization, a lot more purchasing power, and an interest in different foods. The other thing that's quite amazing in this region is that almonds have been a key part of the diet, particularly in Morocco, and that's something we'll talk about a bit more. Now, when you look at exports and what's been happening, as many of you probably know, Morocco is now our industry's 10th largest export market. So it's grown quite dramatically. What we've seen across the region is, in fact, in Egypt, nut consumption has increased over 50%. In the last 3 years. We've seen similar growth in Morocco and then also in Algeria when you start looking at the increase in exports. So it's really a region that we can't afford not to pay attention to, and really we need to look at the opportunities. So again, we're looking at 4 countries. You can't really invest everywhere, you can't get involved everywhere. So where do we start? And that's where we've really focused on our 10th largest export market, which is Morocco. And you'll see here the shipment numbers have steadily increased. And in fact, where we are in the first 7 months of this year is already ahead of the same period last year. So really a great opportunity to start doing more in the region. But as we look at, again, the other real benefit and interest in Morocco is because, as you know, a year ago, the Almond Board invested in an extensive market assessment, looking at where are the new opportunities as we look out 5, 10 years for growth and areas for demand opportunities. And Morocco and Turkey were 2 of the new markets that were identified for investment. So clearly Morocco was an area for us to do more in. Now, what's interesting too is you have in this market a desire to be the gateway to Africa. So there's a lot more infrastructure investment. You have new ports that are being built, a free port in Tangier Med. You have a strong almond culture, which we'll talk about a little bit later. And amazingly, and this is something I think that took a number of people by surprise, you also have the fact that almonds are the US's #2 ag export to Morocco on a value basis. So it really is becoming a more important part, not only of our almond export interests, but also US interests. So I had the opportunity in the last few weeks to participate in a couple of visits to Morocco. And you'll start to see here the kinds of culture that you see and the food preparations. And thank you, Stuart, for the food photography. But what is amazing is many of the dishes, you'll see almonds in everything. Virtually every biscuit, bakery item has almonds. And what I found quite interesting is often when you go to government meetings in various countries, they'll bring out either nuts or cookies or something else to share. Well, in Morocco, it was quite often cookies, and 90% had almonds in them. And that was normally what was provided. So quite remarkable to see the way this has evolved in the market and what the opportunities are for California. It is also where we have a free trade agreement, and I know Brad will be talking about some of this as well, but it's one market where actually California has a duty advantage over most other origins. So imports of almonds from California come in at a 0 duty. Other countries are at 40%. So it's quite unique in that regard, and again, provides us with a great opportunity to do more in the market. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Brad to walk you through the research that's been underway in the 4 countries that we're looking at. I will say that while Morocco has been identified as the first priority, I think as you'll hear from some of our panelists, there are other opportunities in Algeria and even in Libya that we may want to discuss as well. So with that, Brad?
Thank you, Julie. Appreciate the time and the invite to participate in this exciting discussion. So just a quick bit of introduction. My name is Brad Rose. My company, Rose Research, is a full-service marketing research firm and consultancy firm. We do a lot of work there's a lot of acronyms that the US government likes to use. We do a lot of work for the USDA under their market access program. The Almond Board of California participates in that. A lot of other US agricultural interests also participate in this export program. So we've got a lot of experience working all over the world on behalf of cooperatives such as the Almond Board of California. I am here to present some findings on Northern Africa and again, to try to help us answer the question of why Africa. So in order to answer that question, we want to take a little bit of background or take a little bit of a look in terms of why we, the Almond Board, and the US government is excited in the continent as a whole, but certainly in Northern Africa as well. Just reading the tea leaves, looking at global trends, much of the population expansion that will happen in the next 25 years is going to take place in Africa. The United Nations forecasts that the total population in the continent is almost going to double from 2025 to 2050. There's going to be roughly 2.5 billion people living on the continent. As Julie said, there's a lot of markers that also indicate or illustrate why this explosion in population is happening. There's higher fertility rates, there's a younger population, there's improved health care, and as Julie mentioned, also a lot of urbanization that we're seeing going on. That also plays into logistics and distribution, and we'll see that Africa is ready to become a player. It's not going to happen overnight, nothing does. It's going to take some time and some investment and certainly a lot of education, but the opportunities are there. So as I said, the USDA has been, and the Market Access Program, they've all been following all this information. They understand that the population of the continent is going to double, and we engaged directly with the USDA about 4 years ago in 2020 to do an in-depth project among consumers as well as the trade in the continent of Africa. We did this for the US government as a means of them trying to formulate or establish free trade agreements with other countries in addition to the one that we have in Morocco. So we did a few thousand consumer interviews throughout the continent. We also interviewed key members of the trade, and that ranged from importers to wholesalers, to retailers, to food manufacturers, customs and port officials, government officials, local agricultural associations. The findings that we saw in our initial research that we did for the US government were very eye-opening. Because you have to think about this. Right now, we have a very, very limited footprint. The US does in the continent of Africa. We are playing catch-up. The EU has been there much longer than we have. China's been there for longer than we have, so we are playing a game of catch-up. The positives are is that going into this continent, we have a lot of already built-in, if you will, inherent advantages or opportunities. We saw, again, without really having a lot of exposure to US agricultural products, that most consumers in Africa indicated that they would be willing to buy them, 75%. We had almost 9 in 10 say that in addition to wanting to buy those products, that they in fact would pay a premium for them. So those are important indicators. They don't mean that we're going to be successful, but they are indicative of consumer and trade acceptance. I don't want to sound like a broken record as I go through our data, but I might to a certain extent. We look for consistency, and we heard a lot of this. So in addition to assessing these markets in North Africa for the almond industry, we are going to be looking at this from also a strategic or a messaging standpoint. We imagine, we already have a pretty good idea that Morocco is going to be a country that offers us with some opportunity. I would strongly bet that we will find that there will be another country or two that will also offer us opportunity as we continue to move along. What we're going to hear from folks in Africa is that food safety and food quality are extraordinarily top of mind and are extraordinarily important, not only to consumers but to the trade. And when we ask them about their perceptions of US ag, and I feel safe in saying, I can't guarantee this, but when we in the future ask these folks about their perceptions of California almonds, we're going to see that we've got a lot of advantages from a strategic and a messaging standpoint that we can use as we market our product, in this case, as we're marketing California almonds. So I'm going to take you just through some primary data. This was initial findings from research that we did for the US government. We're about to start our consumer and trade data collection for the California Almond Board. Right now, this data, though, reflects consumers and trade in Africa as a whole. I didn't put any numbers here because I didn't want people to be too focused on looking at all the different percentages. But if you will, this chart or this slide here gives us, if you will, a competitive landscape or a competitive assessment of how the US is perceived versus other key competitors in Africa, including the local continent. And we'll see again, and I hate to repeat myself, that despite us not having an awful lot of products available on the continent right now, at least compared to our competitors, the US generates very strong perceptions from a safety standpoint, from a quality standpoint, from a sustainability standpoint, et cetera. There are things that we need to improve on. Our availability is certainly, our perception of being available is lower than Africa, but the key point here is that when we look at this data, right now the US already is well positioned on a lot of key metrics. We need to think about that as we begin to investigate these markets on a one-by-one basis as well. Again, in terms of interest in products and in various agricultural products from the US, we gave the consumers and the trade a number of choices, all different types of categories. The reason I put this slide in is because nuts consistently came to the top as one of the top 3 items that, again, both consumers and professionals would be interested in purchasing or working with from the US. So we see a lot of interest in our category, which again is also important. Again, this is not surprising. We're asking consumers now, where, given the choice, would they prefer to buy their agricultural produce from? And this is an example of local bias, but this is also a very strong chart for the US, even though it doesn't necessarily look like it. We ask this question in countries all over the world, and we oftentimes, almost always, will see that there is a preference of when available, and if the quality is good, and if the safety is good, and if the price is good, if everything is equal, consumers would prefer to buy locally grown produce. They're supporting their local agriculture. Not surprising. The however here is, again, if we look, it's only 18%, but that 18% of consumers who say that they would prefer to buy from the US is 3 times higher than the EU. The EU has been in Africa longer than we have. And it's higher than every other country, every other region. So again, just looking anecdotally, we've got some data here that supports the idea or the concept that consumers and professionals will be receptive to US ag and, again, California almonds. As I said also, we're going to be looking at the data from a messaging standpoint. You know, it's great to find out that consumption of nuts or almonds is increasing and the types of products that almonds are being used in. As we move forward, though, we're going to want to understand how best to position California almonds versus competition versus almonds coming from elsewhere. And moving down the road, we're also going to want to look at almonds versus other nuts. But again, looking at some positioning statements here, we see consistency. Consumers and the trade are much more apt. A lower score here is actually better because we're having the respondents rank these statements from their favorite to their least in terms of what would be motivational. We see things like the safety of US agriculture and the quality, again, of US agriculture coming to the forefront, rather than what I would consider to be the more preachy ones in terms of US ag feeds the world. So quality and safety are top of mind and certainly are things that we need to all keep in mind as we're marketing. The important thing is that we don't have to make all this up from scratch. I pulled this right from the California Almond Board's, or the Almond Board of California's website. A lot of these messages are already there. We're talking about research, we're talking about innovation, we're talking about quality control, we're talking about safety, traceability. These are all important things. Again, you know, we've seen this time and time again. This is It's an educational process. This doesn't happen overnight. It requires consistency and it requires some time, but all of the pieces are in place to we believe have long-term success in Africa, again, based upon what we're seeing and what's already being done. So just a couple more slides in terms of some of the findings from the initial research we did. Again, just hitting these points, just hitting this home. Safety and quality are messages that the industry should lean into. We heard it, we've heard it a lot. So it's really, these are things that the industry should be leaning into and should be making a concerted effort to discuss. And then last but not least, in terms of food safety, again, just to continue to show the U.S. and how we stack up versus other areas, that's a tie, 76% and 75% rating food safety in what we would call the top two box, saying that it's extremely or very safe. So again, this data all shows that we've got a lot of work to do, but we're not really starting at the ground floor. We've got a lot of building blocks that we can take advantage of moving forward. So let's talk specifically for a little bit about the emerging market project that we're going to be doing. We're going to be, as Julie mentioned, focusing specifically on North Africa. Again, a little history in terms of why North Africa. We took a number of trips on behalf of various cooperators. The U.S. government has labeled Africa and a couple of other global regions as regions that they are prioritizing. So the U.S. government is put aside a bucket of funds for these cooperators, the Almond Board of California and other cooperators, to do their due diligence and to do a deep dive into some of these regions. Africa happens to be one. We've taken a number of trips there on behalf of the Alaska Seafood Marketing Institute and on behalf of the National Association of State Departments of Agriculture. They represent all 50 states. When we were in Morocco, we didn't ask them. They told us and they showed us their interest and their capabilities in terms of handling almonds. And as Julie mentioned, as we spent more time there and we saw the amount of integration that almonds have in the traditional diet already, there's a lot of factors that make these markets attractive for us. So Julie happened to take a trip. You've taken 2 trips now? One with NASDA, and then she just took a trip that was sponsored by the USDA to Morocco, and she's continued to hear excitement and enthusiasm from the trade, from professionals in that country. So we're certainly going to continue to be exploring Morocco. We're going to be looking at this, if you will, as if it's a funnel. We've got 4 countries, Algeria, Egypt, Morocco, and Tunisia. We're most likely, I would be very surprised if we come back to the Almond Board, the ABC, and say, hey, we're going to go look at all 4, we should invest in all 4 of these countries. There's going to be a prioritization of these markets. And that will be done through us analyzing the data, as well as having conversations with our counterparts over at the ABC. But just a little bit of information in terms of why we've chosen these markets. Algeria, there's a very high per capita expenditure on food. They do have a robust confectionery industry. Well-developed distribution channels. There's strong infrastructure in the country. Tree nuts in general are popular, and we've seen the value of almond shipments also, I believe, increase in this market in Algeria. So there are certainly a lot of positive indicators, at least in examining this market as part of our North African investigation. Egypt is, if you will, it's the population center of Northern Africa. I think over 110 million people live in Egypt, extraordinarily urbanized. I think the stat is 95% of the population lives in about 5% of the land. It's almost all desert. Because of that, they have to import a lot of their food. So food safety certainly is important to Egypt. Ramadan is a popular time when nuts are consumed, certainly an alternative source of protein. And as Julie mentioned, as the world becomes smaller, and we see this in emerging markets over and over and over, is Western diets. The Western diet tends to become more popular, and that brings positives and negatives. It does lead to health issues, and we've seen this in lots of markets, even in markets like Mexico, where they're starting to put warning labels on products that are high in sodium or high in sugar or high in calories. So there will also be then a blowback in terms of folks looking for food as medicine, food for their health, food for nutrition, and all of the different health benefits that almonds can provide also. So while safety and quality are important, we can't forget about the health benefits and all of the different ways in which almonds can continue to be enjoyed and incorporated. Almonds do enjoy significant cultural history in Egypt as well. We do have a strong bakery sector there. Logistics and infrastructure are relatively on the up and up in Egypt. There are certainly going to be challenges in all of these markets, but again, the building blocks in Egypt do look somewhat favorable. We've talked about Morocco a lot. One of the key benefits that Morocco provides, as Julie mentioned, is it is the only country on the continent that has a free trade agreement with us. So different than almost everywhere else, we come in at a better price. Morocco also does have the ability to be used or to be looked at as a market that can help the industry enter into other Northern African or African markets. They do ship from Morocco to other countries. They have a robust food manufacturing sector. They are ready to do business. They want to do business. I think Julie would say the same thing. From a logistics standpoint, the port in Tanger Med is one of the biggest ports in the world. They've put a lot of money into their infrastructure recently in Morocco, so they are certainly hungry and eager. And then our last market is Tunisia, and we'll again be doing an investigation there as well. The Tunisian economy has recovered slower post-COVID than some of the other countries that we've talked about. However, tourism has been on the increase, and we do see that consumers spend a good portion of their money on food. So again, we've got a country that also is seeing some retail, if you will, retail modernization. The wholesale markets are all going to be important players in all of these countries, but retail is modernizing everywhere as well, as is e-commerce. So again, things that the industry just needs to keep in mind as we're moving forward and looking at and assessing the long-term viability of all these countries. And I think, sorry, this is my last slide, then I'll be done. In terms of next steps, so we have done a few things so far. We've done a lot of background desk research. We're even going to be putting together information regarding labeling requirements that the industry needs to take heed of moving forward in these markets. We did an online focus group conversation with a number of ABC members to hear their initial thoughts and experiences, positive and negative, in Africa and in these markets specifically. We are about to launch our consumer and our trade interviews. Those are going to be very robust interviews. We're going to be coming back with a lot of information. We'll be sharing that with Julie and her team, and most likely we will be then do another, or if you will, a post online focus group among ABC members. Again, we can share information that we've learned regarding these markets and get their assessment of their likelihood of wanting to examine and move forward in these markets. As I said, this is a long-term objective of the industry. It won't happen overnight, but we certainly, from at least an initial standpoint, see an awful lot of opportunity moving forward. And I think without further ado, I will be here and I'm happy to answer any questions, but thank you all.
Thanks, Brad. Okay, great. Okay, well, thank you very much. As you can certainly hear from the discussion, there's a lot of opportunity, and certainly we're very positive about what we can do in that region. What you find out from a couple of trips going over with NASDA and USDA versus going in and doing research is obviously going to be a little bit different from real-world boots on the ground. So let me turn now to Sunny and to Stuart. You're hearing the discussion. You know we've been looking at these new regions. So unvarnished thoughts here. I mean, what are your thoughts on what we're saying? Are we being too optimistic, or what do you see as the opportunities?
Stuart, do you want to take it?
Oh, okay. I'd say that when you look at just the North African countries, you have enormous opportunity. You have 5 countries with a population of over 270 million people combined, economic activity, $850 billion, a culture of almonds. They're in everything in the food. I think it's a huge opportunity, but the unvarnished version is that they're not easy markets to work in. They're traditional wholesale markets. They buy with the eyes. Anyone that thinks they're going to ship poor quality to those markets is sadly mistaken. I think they want good quality for all the reasons that Brad mentioned. They believe in safety of the U.S. product. That's one of the reasons why we've grown so much, especially in Morocco. But as I said, it's difficult. It's a traditional wholesale market. That means that if the local price when your container arrives is dramatically lower than the price of your contract, then there will be some issues. And it's about picking the right trading partners, getting pre-shipment deposits, trying to maintain a safe way of doing business in these markets. But there's no doubt there's huge opportunities in these markets.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I totally second what Stuart is saying. And North Africa, it's a pretty interesting market. Other than contracts, going back to the research, Brad, if you look at the entire North African market, because I visited these markets quite a few times with Sorbonne, my second in charge, one thing I've seen is that food safety and quality is important, right? Because the local production doesn't go through the same manufacturing processes that we have it in US. But the interesting on the health benefits is something which there's a epidemic of diabetes. Mm-hmm. Like, I've met people there, I've met some doctors in terms of, the A1Cs. They have a very elevated level just to put a baseline at 6.5. So I think it's a very nice presentation, very good research, but I think health benefits might become a second basically a third driver as we are growing those markets, like we did it in India with almonds being kind of touted over there. In terms of like we always don't like to talk about negatives, but as Stuart mentioned, in terms of negatives, it's a very tough market, all these markets, and folks who've been in trading industries have been selling product over there for a long time. I think the key in that market is, as what Stuart was saying, but I'll just go a little bit deeper into it. It takes 60 days for a container to reach there. It might even go 75 days. Now, what happens is that the pricing might be different, and because it's a difficult market, so there's a push from California to sell to, a small buyer who doesn't have a lot of reputation in the market. So what happens is that person can disrupt the market, and it makes the pricing very volatile. And then it basically creates problem for everyone. Rather than go into, we can talk about all these issues that everyone has had for the last 10 years. But knowing your customer, meeting them, trying to understand like where the competition is selling to them, trying to get references, and also basically going and meeting their families. And obviously that also helps to know about the usage of almonds also. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of the unbiased thing. But these are very, I would say, precarious perch markets. So that's from my side.
Well, and the point you were just raising too about visiting with people and knowing their families. It seems though in this region, relationships are really essential. So, as you see doing business in that area, obviously it's always important to know your customer. But are there some elements there as far as relationships that are even more important? I mean, how is the trade organized?
In Morocco, especially, Algeria is a little bit different, but in Morocco, Spain used to have a lot of influence. Mm-hmm. And the development of this market was largely from the Melilla and those small places which are under them, like it's Spanish, but it's with the Moroccan, like it has the same border. And because of the strength of Spanish buyers, the financial strength, so they were importing a lot of almonds and then using those areas to bring the almonds into Morocco. And so there was an element of people that they were dealing with in those markets. They were not the typical buyers who, because the margins was big, they were smuggling a lot of product in. When the free trade happened, those same buyers started reaching out to California, and then they basically said, hey, listen, we are good buyers, but when the prices move, the prices are volatile, they just left containers at the port. So in terms of relationship, I would say, there are, like, talking about almond world, this Terra Nova, Valley Pride, Durco, Summit, and a lot of other trading companies. These are very good trading companies, and they have spent a lot of energy visiting these customers. Stuart, obviously, he's originally English, so I'm sure he's went to Morocco a lot of time. So there's a lot of energy, and end of the day, you kind of figure out, hey, we don't have to sell to everyone. And once you get out of that mindset, things start becoming better. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, that you don't have to sell to everybody. I think sometimes we forget that. So now we've focused a lot on Morocco. From what you're hearing of the other markets as well, what would you say, in terms of other regions or other countries that we need to be looking at? So is it Algeria, Tunisia, Egypt, or someplace else?
I'd say the region as a whole is worth looking at. Egypt in particular has a huge economy. I think it's penciled to become the largest African economy by the time of the end of this decade, overtaking South Africa. It's a huge population, again, affinity for almonds and other nuts, a lot of tourism, you know, and so the food service, the hotel industry, there's huge potential, I think, in Egypt as well. And again, the numbers haven't shown it of late, but again, how much is going directly from California to Egypt compared to how much is going to Egypt through Turkey, through other trading destinations? You know, when we get that information, I think, like I said, I think the region as a whole is worth investing in. But it's good to start, you know, plant your flag somewhere, and we'll start with Morocco, given the volume increases that we've seen. I think a lot of the volume increases have been, to a large extent, because of the very cheap almonds we've had. But you know, if we take that kind of benefit we've had over the last few years in order to increase our almond consumption, now it's really the opportunities are focusing the consumer's attention on maintaining that consumption as prices rise and become more sustainable for the almond growers. But it's, you know, we have to try and maintain the momentum that we have with the consumption in places like Morocco once these prices have gone up.
You know, I think that's a terrific point. And just an addition in terms of looking objectively would be, I think Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia. The interesting part is that when we see all the imports into Libya, the consumption in Libya is not very high about almonds. So most of that product is coming to Tunisia. And as Stuart said, Egypt, the reason why we see not high shipments is because of currency fluctuations. And that's where most of the imports, we have to see part of Turkish imports, which actually go into Egypt. But on a whole, I think North Africa is a pretty good market. And I think if we can have more FAS approach to Tunisia, there can be direct imports there. One of the things which kind of separates, other than Egypt, these three countries is that they have a local crop of almonds. So because of the local crop, there are times when, other than Morocco, which we might start seeing in Morocco in the future, but with the free trade agreement, I think we are secure. In Algeria and Tunisia, there is import barriers. In Algeria, there's, I think, 3 months they close almond imports. Right. In Tunisia, I think that's one of the reasons why I've not been able to grow. So I think it's more conversations, like what Stuart was saying in terms of almond, the pricing is definitely much cheaper in whatever their local production is. The California almonds is definitely cheaper. So it's very easy to go into the supply chain over there. Mm-hmm. But I think Tunisia, Algeria would be, from my side, I think somewhere where I think we can actually develop the market, and the shipment process is very arcane over there. So I think help from Almond Board will help.
Well, it's interesting, that point about local production, because it's true in Algeria, we know there's that seasonal ban that usually happens at a certain time of year. When I was in Morocco just a week ago in the market, there were a lot of Moroccan almonds. And what you mainly saw was California or Moroccan, or there was actually, I was told, one selection of almonds was from Russia, which I wondered about. But
probably Californian.
Beautiful Mediterranean weather in Russia.
But with the Moroccan product, they said the issue was that, oh, well, it's the season, they're fresher. So people were actually willing to pay more for the Moroccan almonds than California. Is that something you've heard as well when you've been in the market, or that you've seen?
I'd say that it's just a logistical kind of obvious point. Here we are now in December, and really new crop from California is only just started to arrive in those markets. They traditionally take Butte Padre varieties. California isn't really shipping those until October at the earliest. And, therefore, Morocco has the benefit of its own local crop coming off the trees in September. So they probably have that perception this time of year. I wonder if they'll have that perception in a few months. But I have heard that, especially this time of year.
There's in terms of Morocco specifically, I think with the local growers, there's a lot of acreage in almond production, but the yields are very low because of the obvious reasons. So I think there's a lot of honor in Africa. I started my career working for a pretty big company in Africa, buying cocoa and coffee and cashews. So in these countries, it becomes almost like a micro economic kind of a place. So there's a lot of honor buying their own crop. I'm not sure how much of that, it's a pretty substantial part of it. And then a lot of these traders, like, for example, Morocco, the organized retail, I don't think it's more than 20%. Stuart was talking about the wholesale. 80% is wholesale. So a lot of these wholesalers, because of the margin, they have been able to invest in almond orchards in Morocco. So there's a little bit honor when you talk to them that they want to use, and I totally agree with Stuart. I don't think there's any freshness is just more psychological.
Well, I was thinking too, you'd probably have, I always thought that the Moroccan crop was more bitter almonds than sweet varieties, but evidently that's not the case. So
I honestly don't know if they're taking Spanish varieties and planted those down there, or if they have their own varieties. Did you find that out at all?
No, but they looked very nice. They looked very similar to what you'd see coming from California. So what was interesting is that the almonds all looked quite uniform. You didn't have a lot of unusual or what looked to be significantly mixed varieties or anything like that. So it actually looked very nice, at least what they had in the markets.
It looks more like a wood colony, the local almond there. And I think there's been a lot of investment in Morocco by the state. The king owns the place, and also the U.S. So I think they've done a good job, like in terms of the route for, because I think the farming was always there, but I think in the last 7 to 8 years there's been more investments. So maybe they have gone for the sweet almonds.
Yeah.
But they do have bitter almonds there also.
Yeah. Well, and this idea of the distribution, and this is something, Brad, that, I think when you're doing some of the questions, it'll be interesting to hear a little more about how almonds are getting into consumer channels. Because you're right, 80% of the distribution is through the wholesale markets.
Or more.
Yeah, or more, exactly. And there were probably like 2 streets where most of the traders are. And they were saying that even the hotels and others would come to the market to get almonds. So, is that something that you're seeing too, really starting to evolve? I mean, how do almonds get to consumers? Is it still really through these wholesale markets?
Well, it's something that we're going to certainly find out in our questioning and answering, listening to the folks who are doing business on the ground, and what we know, we still know that is strong wholesale. That will change. I mean, retail modernization is happening everywhere. It's not going to happen again. It's not going to happen overnight. But we do want to have a forward-looking lens for when those shifts start to happen. But certainly, business is happening more traditionally there right now.
Yeah. Well, and certainly people are buying with their eyes. I mean, no question about that.
And it's not surprising that you would hear from the local industry that their product is fresher. Absolutely. Whether it is or it isn't. We would expect to hear that. As Sonny mentioned, though, too, quality and safety isn't the only thing that we're going to hang our hats on. We've got a lot of health messaging that we can certainly take advantage of as well, and we should be, just like we're doing in all of our other markets.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's really the advantage is when you already have a cultural affinity to nuts, there's already a receptivity to the health message. So, and that does go a long way. But, you know, with the rapid growth in shipments to Morocco, the question that always comes up is this really staying in Morocco? Is it being transshipped? Is this like, you know, Turkey or somewhere else where a lot of the product lands but goes elsewhere, especially now with Tangier Med? So is that something you're seeing, or is what goes to Morocco staying in Morocco?
I'd say what goes to Morocco pretty much stays in Morocco. Yeah. It's, again, there's just, in all of their food cuisine, there isn't one meal of the day that doesn't have almonds in it.
It's pervasive, you know, the amount of almonds being used, so 100%. I think Morocco, because, you know, if you look at geographically, the borders with Algeria are sealed. They don't have good relations. So there's no way there's going to be infiltration. And the only place, I think, all the Libyan imports, they're actually ending up in Tunisia. That's the only difference. So these Algeria, Morocco, and Tunisia, they're big consumer of almonds. It's pervasive, you know, like they have in the morning, you know, I looked at the health in terms of Indians eating almonds in the morning. Well, there's almonds in the morning there at the hotels. There's bakery products, big time. And then lunchtime, they have tagine, almonds are there. And then the gifting and, you know, just regular meeting, it's I would say it's a modified Arab world where almonds are like pretty pervasive.
Well, it was surprising because in the market you would see, I have to say I'd never seen walnuts that were total shelled. I mean, it was like the whole walnut without the shell. Or halves.
It's two halves still stuck together.
Yeah, it's like they took the shell off, but the whole walnut. And they were saying that walnuts go into a particular city where they then remove the shell, and that's, you know, you'd see that in the market. But in terms of everything else, there really wasn't as much other nuts that you would tend to see in a lot of other fresh fruit markets. So, I mean, Brad, not to put you on the spot with any of your other competitor research that you're doing, but I mean, are you seeing that as something quite unique to almonds as far as some of the opportunities we have?
Well, I think that there definitely are some unique opportunities that almonds have compared to competitive nuts. We've heard that in other work that we've done for the peanut group and for the walnut group even. So there are definitely inherent advantages that almonds have versus competitive snack nuts as well. Those are all things that we're going to want to find out in greater detail, and we certainly will.
Not to put you on the spot, but it's always nice to hear where we have a competitive advantage in a number of ways. So. I think coming back to this whole idea of the challenges in the market, you've both been pretty active in the region, I would say successful in the region for the most part.
We would like to say.
Yeah. I mean, you weren't...
We're still here, Julie, let's put it that way.
That's true. Yeah, you didn't say no when I asked you to be on the panel. So from that standpoint, as people start to get more involved, what would be some of the suggestions or cautions, recommendations you'd make as we start to get involved in the market and as others start to ship to the market?
I'd kind of like to pick up on Sunny's point. You know, if some of us have made the investment in time and energy and resource into getting to know those markets, you know, the safest way in for sure is just to, you know, call Terranova, call Valley Pride, call those people that are already doing that market, that are gonna, you know, take care of your contracts, do the shipping, do everything for you, pay your bill, and you won't even have to worry about the risks that are in place in North Africa. But if you do decide you want to go there yourself, as I mentioned before, I think without doubt, start by knowing your customer, going to visit, understanding what they do with the product, what resources they have, and just getting to know them a lot better before you suddenly just jump in and start shipping product to these North African countries. Deposits, with some financial skin in the game, buyers typically will perform better, but there's no guarantees. So it really is about knowing your customer and being willing to accept the risks and the opportunities that these markets present.
All right.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think these markets I think there's a tremendous potential, but at the same time, I would say these are pretty dangerous markets if you don't know what you're doing. And just a little point added to what Stuart was saying, the document presentation through the bank can also be very risky in these markets. So for example, if I'm a new person and I want to start selling into Morocco, I would just travel, go there, and at least speak to some of the industry participants. And also there are a few guys that you don't do business with. And plus, with the banks that you're dealing with, for example, if you sold some cargo to them, make sure you send the SWIFT so that the customer has an account there in that bank. Mm-hmm. So stuff like that. It's a very fairly complicated system over there. So, and I'm like, it's got tremendous potential. So everyone should try to do something about it, but listen and know your customer.
Yeah.
And I think you've just been down there, and it has the feeling of like India 15, 20 years ago. It suddenly exploded and opening up,
yeah.
And now, everybody's looking at a few successful importers, and so everybody's showing up and wants to import almonds. And not everybody's capable of doing it. Not everybody has the resources to do it. And as you found out when you were down there, once the container lands there and the importer starts to make their customs clearance, it's almost very difficult to get your product back, without your importer now agreeing to give it to you back. And again, it has that kind of India NOC feeling as well about it.
Yeah. Well, and that was a conversation I actually had with some of the authorities on this last trip, was that and also about fumigation. And it was interesting because they were saying, well, they rejected certain phytos because they didn't have the treatment on the phyto. And so we were saying, well, have you actually put that in the instructions? Because if APHIS doesn't have that in the instructions, they won't put it on the phyto. And they didn't realize that. So I think there's also room to work with the authorities to better understand what the requirements are, because I think there is a certain level of trying to move these things forward without understanding maybe what the practical parts of the business are coming from a shipping country. So how do we come up with some equivalence and harmonization of requirements so we can try and, minimize some of those problems?
Well, I think that's some of the work for the TAC committee. I mean, it is about access to markets, and that's one of those things. Educating the authorities makes for smoother trade for everybody who decides they want to try and participate in these North African markets. So I think it's up to the Almond board to definitely educate these authorities to make sure that it goes smoothly. And when you have rejections, which you will do, again, being able to fumigate your product if it's rejected for an infestation, being able to fumigate your product before it leaves and comes back to the United States would be something I'd add to the list of things for the authorities, please, because there's nothing worse if it's already infested and it's going to take another 60 days to come back. It doesn't look pretty when it gets back here.
Maybe even a little bit
across.
more, and then FDA is stopping it here and say, hey, there's too much infestation on this. So just a quick point. One thing is that the culture, and this is not just related to Morocco, it's Algeria also. We've not had too much experience in Tunisia. A little bit in Libya also pretty similar. I think there's a culture of just the containers at the port, and like you are thinking, okay, where's the money going to come from? It's just a culture, like they don't care. And these are, some of them are in Morocco, they're big buyers in Dermila market. And they're just leaving containers for 2 months. 60 days plus 2 months is 120 days. So I don't think there's any margin left over there. And it's just a culture. And I think as was Stuart, one point which I took from what he was saying is that Almond board in terms of educating the authorities over there and a quick action over there. So that I think that is going to totally change the negotiation. And that's going to develop that market in a pretty nice way.
Yeah. Is there more you could see us doing as well with the trade as far as, we started looking at what kinds of activities do we take going forward? Is it more things like workshops, delegations? Is that educational aspect something that would be beneficial as well?
Absolutely. If what Brad was saying in terms of the population increase, so the demand for, let's say, nut products is directly correlated to the population increase. And the economies are growing in those areas, in those countries, sorry. So the more we can be talking to the government, we can be talking to the industry participants, the more we educate the buyers about, hey, Butte Padre is done now, so start buying some other varieties. The more education, and I think that's going to be very productive.
I think we've had in the past, some European port authorities have made trips here. Yeah. Something similar to that for some of the authorities based in each of these countries. Well, and again, focusing if our first priority is Morocco, starting with Morocco and bringing them here to see and cement that idea of quality and food safety. In addition to, you'll have a lot better success, I think, in getting your message across with APHIS about, they can see, oh, this is a local county inspector writing the phytosanitary certificate. Well, this is where the information that you're looking for goes in. It just, I think it completes the picture for these
Right.
Importing authorities, rather than they sit thousands of miles away and open a container door and just send it off, and all look at the paperwork. I think it's just completing the picture for them would be very helpful.
Right. Great. Well, thank you very much to the panel and Brad for the presentation. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. If you do have other questions, I think there were cards in the back, so if you wanted to write something down with contact details, we'd be happy to take care of that. Again, thank you for coming to this year's annual conference. We have a lot going on, so I hope you'll enjoy the sessions, State of the Industry this afternoon, and then, of course, getting over to the trade show floor. So, thank you very much.